So the last thing I want to showcase is pseudocode. So pseudocode is just an informal way of programming. It's more like a description that doesn't require any kind of strict programming language syntax or underlying technology considerations. So it's super useful to create an outline or a rough draft of a program. It really just summarizes the flow of the program. So I'll just go over a couple of examples here. So example one, we have the pseudocode that says output hello. So in Python, that would look something like this, where it says print hello. Another example is in pseudocode, we could say output what is your name. In Python, this would be print what is your name. You could say in pseudocode store user input as name. In Python, that might look like name equals input. In pseudocode, the line output how old are you would be print how old are you. So pretty much the common thing here is now you see output can be kind of like equivalent to the print statement in Python, where whatever you want to output is passed within the print function in Python. So another example of pseudocode would be store user input as age. And so that's once again we use the input function. This time we're storing it as a variable named age. And since it's going to be a number, a whole number, we'll use the int function as well in Python. But you see how much simpler the pseudocode is. It's really just English explaining what the purpose of that line of code is supposed to do, right? Okay, so here's the next example. So line 1 would say output hello, and you see in Python that says print hello. And then you might say output what is your name, and then store user input as name. And in Python that would be the line name equals input what is your name. And then following it would say output how old are you, and then store the user input as age. And this would say, in Python, it would say age equals, so set the variable age to be the input how old are you passed through this int function. So it's a whole number. Okay, and the last pseudocode example, output enter the area of the rectangle, store user input as area. You can see here in Python, similar to the previous lines as well, but this time we're using the float function just to make sure that they can enter a decimal number. But see, these are specifics that don't really quite matter as much in pseudocode. We're only saying that we need to store the user input as area. Right? It's not quite as important that we're using or we're allowing decimal numbers or anything like that. We're just explaining on an overview what the purpose of that line is. So once again, store user input as area. Then after that, output enter the width of the rectangle and store user input as width. So it says width equals, and then grab input, say enter the width of the rectangle, convert that to a float. And then length equals area divided by width. In this case, they're both pretty much the same. And then output the length is length. And in Python, that would look like this. So now I just want to go over two questions from the EQAO. The first one says, this pseudocode asks for two numbers and divides them. Output, enter the first number. Store user input as first. Output, enter the second number. Store user input as second. If second equals 0, output error. Else, result equals first divided by second, output result. So the question is, what is the purpose of the line if second equals 0? That's this line right here. Our options are to set the second to 0. Okay, well, that's not quite it because it's part of an if statement. And if we're ever using an if statement, it's just to check something. So we really just want to check if second is 0 here, not to set it to 0. So that's not the answer. To multiply the result by 2, once again, this line isn't really doing any multiplication. It's just checking. Then overall, we can see to make the next answer would be to make the pseudocode divide by 0 to cause an error. Well, it's really just kind of checking if the code will divide by 0, because we want to divide the first number by the second number. That's happening on this line here. So of course, if the second line is a 0, that would cause an error, but here we're just checking if it's a 0. And so the last option is to prevent the pseudocode from dividing by 0 and causing an error. And that's what this looks like it's doing. So here it says if second is equal to 0, it will output error. And otherwise, it allows us to divide. So in this chunk of code here, there's no way that second is equal to 0 because it failed this previous check. So second must be something that's non-zero, and so this division is fine. Okay, next question. A company that makes containers is creating a program that will determine and display the volume of a cylindrical package after the radius and height are input by the user. Given the following lines of pseudocode, drag and drop the lines from the right side into the correct blank space to create the program. So I can't drag and drop, but I'll just create arrows that point to the area where these should go. So we see first we have output enter the radius, and then we have store user input as radius. And there's an empty slot here, and then it says store user input as height. And then there's an empty slot here, and then there's an empty slot here. So already it looks like just based on the pattern here, we should output enter the height here before grabbing the user, storing the user input as height. So that's this option right here. So what I'll do is I'll add an arrow. This arrow should be, I'll do orange. Oops. Like that. Okay. So that one goes there. So output enter the height and then store user input as height. Then it needs to display the volume, determine and display the volume. So we have 2 steps left here, and we have 2 tasks left as well. The first one says it needs to determine the volume, and the second one needs to display the volume. So which ones of these look like that? So this one, volume equals, okay, so it's one of these two because they're both setting a variable volume, calculating it. Now this one says 3.14 times radius times height, or radius times height squared. And this one says volume equals 3.14 times radius times height, so radius squared times height. So this one is the correct one. This one says pi r squared times height. So that one is going to go next. So that will go here, where we'll run the calculation and determine the volume. And then finally, we can output the volume. So it's one of these last two. Output the volume is volume, or output the volume is radius times height. So radius times height, that is not the volume. So it's got to be this one. We just calculated the volume, and we can use that in the output. So here we go. I'll add the last arrow like that. And so that gives us our answer.